The settlement numbers used in my examples are just examples. Every case is different. I'm using numbers to help you understand the process. I'm not talking about your case. And just because I'm discussing settlement numbers doesn't mean that your case will definitely settle. It's unlikely, but possible, that we may recover nothing in your case. Therefore, we highly recommend that you do not think about how you will spend whatever monies you may receive as a result of your case. For example, college tuition, home improvements, vacations, cars, new businesses, etc. Results are not guaranteed in any case. So please, don't spend this money before you get it. Hi everybody, I'm Jeff Kimmel, managing partner of the firm. This is part 2 of the What's My Case Worth video. Now in part 1, we covered the evidence and how the strength of the evidence affects the value in your case. And by evidence, we talked about liability, meaning fault, and we talked about the injury, meaning how serious is the injury, and how both of those components contribute to the answer to the question of what's my case worth. So now, since we covered that, we're going to talk about the number. Okay, we know this case has these strengths, has those weaknesses. So how do we, the lawyers and the insurance company, how do we come up with the number? Before we get into the actual number, or really the range of what your case is worth and how we come up with that, I want to address something. Many or most people have a distorted view of what personal injury cases go for, what their value is. And when I say it's distorted, it's because most people are subject to so many things that turn out to be misleading. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the news. I'm talking about your friends, your family, your friends of friends, your family friends. Everybody has an opinion or a thought or an idea about these cases and what these cases may or may not be worth. And these ideas come from what people hear from other people, what people see on television, what people read in the newspaper, on social media. And what I'm saying here is these views, these people are not lying, and what you're hearing aren't lies from your friends and family. What I'm saying is these sources and these people don't have the full story, and more often than not, they don't have the end of the story. What am I talking about? Well, first of all, there are runaway verdicts, which are verdicts you read about in the newspaper, where somebody is awarded by a jury a ton of money. So $100 million, $500 million for some accident, some incident, a brain damaged baby case perhaps, where a jury has heard the facts and all the evidence and issued a huge verdict. And that's the headline, and that's what people see, and that's what people hear, and people assume that a verdict, meaning a jury verdict, is what the plaintiff walks away with. Well, the reality is that's almost never the end of the story, because a jury verdict in any state in our country, especially in New York, a jury verdict doesn't end the question because it really begins the next part of the case, which is an appeal. And what you don't read about is what happened during the appeal process, because that's happened years later, and perhaps the case could even settle while an appeal is going on. But when it gets reported, if it gets reported, because it rarely does, years later, it's certainly not the headline. It's something that may be buried in the newspaper somewhere, but more likely than not, you won't even hear about it because it'll ultimately settle. It won't be a disclosed amount, and you'll never know it even happened. So that's one thing that distorts the public's view of what these cases are worth, and would change the answer to your question of what's my case worth, because you may have seen something in the newspaper and said, hey, I got some similar case going on here. Am I going to get that much money too? And my answer is going to be, well, I don't know how that case really ended. Maybe I'll be able to find out. But those cases are very rarely benchmarks for what your case is worth. Now, I mentioned the appeal process. Now, our system actually has a check and balance in place to keep verdicts and keep settlements within reason, because the law says a settlement and the value of the case has to be fair and reasonable. Those are the words. And when a verdict comes in and it's beyond fair and reasonable, if it's way too much, or it could be too little, there are cases where verdicts get increased because it wasn't enough money, those get appealed. Now, that's the check and balance in our system. So what happens is, after a verdict of whatever, the appeal happens, and then first it'll be the judge trying the case will hear a motion from the defendant saying, hey, this is too much of a verdict. This is too much money. It should be reduced. And whatever that decision is can be appealed to an appellate court where there's a panel of judges who are going to decide whether or not that number is too much, too little, or just about right. And it's never a number. It's always a range that is being applied to a particular situation. So we do have in our system in place a way to deal with these excessive runaway verdicts. You don't read about this in the newspaper. It's not big news. Nobody really cares. It's a little boring to read an appellate decision and all that goes into it. So that does not grab a headline. And that's what people don't really know, that these excessive verdicts are rarely the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new story, a long story that nobody reports, and it certainly affects the value of the case. So let's get into the number. How do we actually get the number? Well, like I said, it's not really a number that we talk about as lawyers and insurance company people. We generally throw around phrases that talk about a range. So it's usually the insurance company taking a position, say, that the case is not worth $50,000. It's not worth $5,000, and the message is that's the top number that you could expect to get, and it's never going to hit that, so let's start negotiating below that number. Or oftentimes lawyers and insurance companies talk about a five-figure case, meaning a $10,000 case. That they'll say that this isn't even a five-figure case, so that means they're never going to pay $10,000 or more. So if you want to start negotiating, you better be looking for something in the $5,000 to $9,000 range. Or they talk about a six-figure case, meaning $100,000. So the insurance company could start by saying, this is not a six-figure case. So if you're not in six figures, if you're above six figures, we can't talk. So the discussions usually center around these generalities and these ranges. And that's how the negotiations start. So who sets these ranges? How are these ranges even set? And that's really the question. Here's the answer. This is how the numbers get put on your case. You ready? Do we have a drum roll? This is it. It's based on precedent. Now, that's a legal term, and it means what's happened before. Preceding, right? Preceding what's happened in your case, something similar has happened in the past. So the courts and the insurance companies look at precedent. They look at what's happened in the past, what's happened before that's similar to your particular case. Now, it's important to know that your case is special, it's different. There's something different about your case than any other case. However, the way the lawyers and the judges and the insurance companies look at it, your case can be summed up in one sentence, right? It's a car accident at an intersection and you have a broken ankle. Or it's a medical malpractice case with a failure to diagnose breast cancer. It could be one sentence. Now, there's a lot more that goes into your particular case, but the value and the range starts with, okay, what's this case generally? It's a car accident and it's an intersection, question of lights, with a fractured ankle without surgery. Now, that's happened many times in the past. Now, if that's your case or something similar, then okay, those are the facts of your case. But what the lawyers do and the insurance companies do is they look at the precedent of those facts and that injury combined together. So there's been plenty of cases where there's been an intersection accident where someone's broken an ankle or an arm or whatever. And what the lawyers do and the insurance companies do is they look and they research what have those cases gone for, what have those cases settled for, what's been the number in those cases, because we're going to use that precedent to say that's what this person's case is worth. Now, the lawyer, the plaintiff's lawyer, is going to argue, I'm going to be arguing, well, our case is different because your injury is worse. They're going to be arguing, the case is different because the fault is better or worse, or whatever it benefits them. But we start with the precedent. So there's a ton of case law. Now, I just talked about appeals. So cases with facts similar to yours may have been appealed in the past because there's been an excessive verdict, and then the appellate division has issued a decision putting a range on that particular case. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but if that precedent exists, if there's a case out there where there was a verdict that in a situation like yours that went up on appeal and then got decided, and in that decision the judges wrote a bunch of stuff about, okay, this is a car accident at an intersection with someone with a fractured ankle, and the verdict was $10 million, but we're going to reduce it to X. Now we know that X is the beginning of that range that we're going to use in your case. Now we're going to argue the facts in your case versus the facts in that case, and why you should get the high end of that range versus the other side who's going to say the low end. But it starts with that precedent. And how do we find it? Like I say, we're lawyers. We research, and the insurance company hires lawyers to do the research on their end. So everybody generally going into these negotiations has an idea of what the range is. But understand that every case is different. Every case is unique. So whatever the range is in someone's head based on what the lawyers told them or what our research has revealed, these facts are really relevant to your case only, and that's why no one knows. That's why no one is certain what your case will be, because we're going to try and convince them it's worth the high end of the range, and they're going to try and convince me that it's worth the low end of the range. So what are the factors? What do we consider in your case that makes your case different from these older cases, these cases that make up the precedent, the things that happened in the past? What do we look at in your case to say that it's worth the higher end of this value range versus the lower end? What are the factors? This is it. These are the money questions. Number one, age, how old you are. Now that's a factor because we're talking about your injury and we're talking about pain and suffering as the component of value. We said that's part of it. So age is important because when we talk about pain and suffering, we talk about past pain and suffering, meaning what you've experienced from the time of the accident up until now, meaning either we're at a trial, or more likely we're just talking about settling the case and it's been a year, 2 or 3. So how much pain and suffering have you endured if you're still having pain? If you haven't, if say you got better, then we look at and we say, okay, well you were in pain for 6 months. But let's say you're still in pain and you're going to be in pain. Say you have a permanent injury. We look at your age because if your injury is permanent, that means that you've suffered X amount up till now, and you're also going to be experiencing pain and suffering in the future. So God forbid you have a permanent injury. Say you've injured your back and you had surgery and the doctor says your back's never going to be the same. You're going to have some deficit for the rest of your life. So that term, for the rest of your life, has a different meaning to a 20-year-old versus an 80-year-old. Now, it means the same thing as the rest of your life, but to a 20-year-old, you're looking at another, 60, 70 years of future pain and suffering. Now, there's a value to 60, 70 years of pain and suffering versus an 80-year-old who may have whatever, 5 years, maybe they're beyond their life expectancy. So there's a value to that. Now, obviously, the values are different. So the way the law is and the way these values are determined, age is a factor, and younger people who have permanent injuries, their value to that component of their case is more. That's just the fact. So that's the first factor, age. What else? The particulars of your injury are very important. So what did you suffer? What was it, a broken bone? Did you have surgery? Are you going to have more surgery? Is it getting better? Is it going to get better? Is it not going to get better? So the particulars matter. And of course, the more severe the injury and the more permanent, or if it's permanent or not, is going to be a factor that's going to put your case at the higher end versus the lower end of this value range. Also, your particular medical history may play a role because it may affect, say, your life expectancy. So if you have some underlying medical condition that is going to cut your life expectancy short, and let me say at this point, these are statistics we're talking about. It's a little morbid talking about, your life expectancy and that you're not going to live forever, these kinds of things. And we don't really talk like this with clients. I'm doing this in this video because I want you to understand what it is we're talking about. And again, every case is different. But so these are generally the topics that we cover. So life expectancy is a tough one to talk about, especially with a client. But here we're talking about, okay, if your medical history is such that you have a short life expectancy because of a condition, that's a factor. It's going to affect the value of the case. Also, the cost of your future medical care, right? So if you have a permanent injury and you still need medicine, you still need doctor care, you still maybe need to be hospitalized. These are in some really severe cases where people need these things going forward and there's a cost associated with that. Of course, that's going to affect the value of the case because we're going to argue at a trial, say at the end of the case to a jury, that these costs for this person are real. And we'll have a doctor come in and say, this person is going to need future medical care and treatment and medicines and all that. So that's another factor that's going to enhance the value or not and put you somewhere in the range of value in your particular case. Now, let me say here that wrongful death, if a case involves a death, we're not talking about that. Well, these things apply to that, but there's more. And it's a lot more. And it's even a little different. There's a whole body of law that applies to wrongful death cases and what makes up the elements of injury in a wrongful death case. And it gets a little complicated, so much so that I'm going to create another video for that. So you'll be able to see specifically in wrongful death cases what else is considered. And just by way of example, if someone passes away and has young children, those children are entitled to certain monies. And that's a calculation. It's a little complicated, but I will explain that. So suffice it to say here that if it's a wrongful death that you have, there'll be more to it than what I'm explaining. And I'll give you the additional stuff in another video. And another element of damages that I haven't hit yet are lost earnings, your wages. So if you have a job and you can't work because of your injury, then that value is part of the case. What do I mean? If you make $50,000 a year and you're injured at a construction site and you can't work for 5 years, you say, okay, well, it's pretty easy. I would have made $50,000 over the next 5 years. So you just take a calculator, you add it together, you multiply it, and that's the number. So if you have earnings and you're making a living and you can't do that because of your injury, then that loss will enhance the value of the case. Now, arguably, this isn't fair because people earning more money, their case is seemingly worth more. So we do, as plaintiffs' lawyers, we try to get these laws changed to make it more fair going forward. And every year we try to go to Albany and have certain laws passed that are more advantageous and more fair to everybody. But what I'm telling you in this video is, as the law currently stands, this is what it is. So if you're earning $200,000 and you're out of work for the remainder of your work life, versus if you earn $20,000, obviously the $200,000 case is going to be worth more. The value is going to be higher on the value range for a $200,000 earner than a $20,000 earner. So that's another factor that is considered when we're talking about where your case falls on this value range. So there may be other factors that are applicable because your case may have some other relevant facts or a situation that would enhance the value. But in general, those are the factors that we consider. Remember too that the value can change, right? So if we're in the beginning of the case and we're having this conversation, or maybe we're talking settlement in the beginning. Maybe they're trying to resolve the case and they've made an offer and we're discussing it and it falls through and we continue with the case. After something like that, the value can change because more evidence can come about. So if early on before a lawsuit we've discussed numbers and it didn't resolve, okay, but then the case starts and what happens? We get new evidence. We give them new evidence, meaning some reports get exchanged, or say a video shows up. Somebody had a video of the intersection accident, and that can change the value. Somebody's injury gets worse, that's going to change the value. Somebody's injury resolves, gets better, that's going to change the value. We thought it may have been permanent, but it's not. We thought you were going to need a surgery, but you didn't. So, and we addressed this in part one, but I just wanted to repeat that the value, even in your case, with the facts being what they are, can change if the evidence changes. So that can happen. I want to talk about who pays your settlement, because a lot of people don't realize that almost always the money we get on your case, on any case, comes from an insurance company. Almost always. Almost never do we get any money from a person or a business that we sue, because the people and the businesses that we sue almost always have insurance. That's why you have insurance. These cases involve accidents. No one does this stuff on purpose, right? That we're never in court on our cases, almost never in court from an intentional act. These are accidents, car accidents. Doctors make mistakes. People make mistakes at construction sites, whatever it may be. There's insurance for accidents, and that's almost always the amount of money that exists for us to get in a lawsuit. So the people and the businesses rarely ever need to go into their pocket to pay us in a settlement or after a verdict, because almost always, like I said, it comes from an insurance company. Now, can we get a person to pay out of pocket? Can we get a business to pay out of pocket? The answer is we can, but the full answer is it's really hard and almost impossible to do for a lot of reasons. But suffice it to say that you need to have a judgment against somebody or some business in order to freeze their assets. People hear these terms, right? And I've had clients come and say, well, are we going after this person individually? They have money. Okay, they may have money, but you can't do anything to them, and you can't try to get any money or try to freeze their assets unless you actually have a judgment, a piece of paper that says that they were responsible for what happened. And a lawsuit, serving them with a lawsuit, is not that. A lawsuit is just a claim against somebody that they're responsible for your injury or for whatever happened. It doesn't mean they are. And so people who have money and businesses that have money generally have the means to figure out a way to make themselves what we call judgment proof, right? It means that If they get served with a summons to complaint and they know they have money and they know that they're in trouble, then those people and those businesses generally have the means to shift those assets legally, perfectly legally, because there is no judgment. It's just a lawsuit. It's just a claim to protect themselves from having to spend money out of their pockets. Doctors in other states do this quite often, where they make themselves judgment proof and then they don't carry insurance. That's a whole other story. But the concept is the same. Here in New York, you can make yourself judgment proof because unless a judgment is levied against you, the plaintiff, we don't have any power to say, oh, he's got all that money in the bank, let's freeze that until the case is over. This doesn't happen. And many people are not aware of this. And many people, understandably, are very upset when they're in an accident and they hear perhaps that the policy limits of a particular insurance situation for somebody who caused an accident is limited. I can't tell you how often it does happen where somebody has a bad injury in a car accident and the policy is $25,000 and the injury is so bad it's obviously worth more than that. And the people who are injured are justifiably extremely upset that this is the only amount of money available. But that's what happens sometimes, where if there's a limited policy, we're not realistically going to get more than what the policy is. And I will say in the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, that's it. Now, have we ever, in the history of the firm, gotten somebody to pay out of their pocket, whether it's a person or a business? Yes. But I will say it's extremely and exceedingly rare, and it's very difficult. And what happens is, once you get that judgment, it means that we've gone to trial and got a verdict, or we've made a motion and a judge has decided in our favor. But then we win, then we still have to get an award, meaning there still has to be a trial or that where there's a number issued that the case is worth X, and then we have to enforce that judgment. Now that's a whole other lawsuit and a whole other process that we have to go through to get that money. And have we done it? Very rarely. Do we know how to do it? Sure, we know how to do it. But what we know is it's very difficult to do. It's almost always fruitless, meaning we don't get it because it's hidden or it doesn't exist anymore or it never existed. So I'm making the point here because it's relevant. The money that the insurance company has available is almost always the maximum that we can get on any case. And understand too that this money is coming from an insurance company. It's a business that is making business decisions about how to spend their money. And insurance companies are just in the business of risk versus reward. They don't know you. They don't know your name. They know your case is case number 42755XYZ, right? And there's no emotion. And they are just making strictly business decisions on every case. Now, they take into account the emotional element and the sympathetic element because they know a jury may ultimately determine this case, so that they're aware of it. But it's not affecting their decision. Their decision is risk versus reward. And if an insurance company doesn't want to pay you any money, we can't get any money, right? So a lot of times people say, oh, what do you think my case is worth? Part of the answer is it doesn't really matter what I think your case is worth. We could talk about what I think your case is worth, but your case is worth what the insurance company is willing to pay. And it's my job to convince the insurance company that your case is worth a lot because of X, Y, and Z, and because I'm going to try the case, and because we have all these great verdicts and settlements, and our reputation is such that we're going to do really well if we have to go to trial. But at the same time, if they know something that I don't, or they just have a feeling, or whatever the case may be, or their financials are a certain way, if they don't want to pay any money, we don't get any money. That's the end of it. So it's really my firm and me trying to convince an insurance company to pay us, and it's their decision. And all I do, really, is convey to you what their decision is and what their offer is, along with my opinion and recommendation as to whether or not we should take the money, tell them no way, or continue negotiating, or something else, depending on the situation. But understand, this is their money, it's their decision. It's almost never the client, the defendant's personal money or the business's money. It's an insurance company money. They're hiring lawyers, they're paying for the defense, and they're making the decision about how much should we pay to settle this case. So it's a lot of communication that we have to go through, but that's what's going on. So exactly when and how does a case get settled? Well, as far as when, a case gets settled anytime. And we try to get cases settled quicker rather than later because it's just more advantageous to have money sooner than later, just because of the time value of money and all the expenses that go into going forward with this and the emotional toll it takes on everybody. But we can settle the case before we even start a lawsuit, or we could settle it once the lawsuit starts. At any time we can settle the case. We oftentimes have mediations where we schedule sort of meetings with these companies that have retired judges that try to get cases settled. We could settle it in court with the judge assigned to the case. We could settle it at a conference. We could settle it over the phone at any time. So there really is no restriction on when. It can even happen when a trial starts, after the trial starts. It could happen when a jury is deliberating. Cases can be settled at any time. Now, that's not to say an offer may be made and then withdrawn, right? So the insurance company can say, before the lawsuit, they can say, we'll pay you X. But if it goes into suit, now we have to start paying money to pay the lawyers. And so we're not going to pay, the offer's off the table, right? Now, it's really up to them. It's rare that an offer is taken off the table, but it could happen. So really the case can settle at any time. So I've given you a lot of information about this value process and the settlement process. And what I'll say is what I say at the beginning of the case to a lot of my clients who want to know on the first day they walk in, what's the value of the case? And my standard response really is, listen, if you're here and we're interested in investigating your case and taking your case and moving forward with your case, that means that we think it has value, and it has enough value to warrant our time, our effort, our money, not your money, because we're paying all the expenses, but including your time, your effort, your emotional toll, the emotional toll that it's going to take on you to have to live through this and talk about it some more and be questioned under oath about what happened and have to think about it and maybe subject yourself to a physical examination. That's a lot. So what I tell people is, given all that, if we're interested in going forward, we don't want to waste our time and money. We certainly don't want to waste your time. And so if you're here and we're going forward and then we put the case in suit and we're committed, we think that it's worth what that value range is. Now, we don't really talk about the numbers, but what I say is I think it's worth it to go forward. Because if it wasn't, I wouldn't want to put you through this. So that's the answer I give in that first meeting when people ask me, what's my case worth? And now, after watching these two videos, I think you have a much better understanding why that's my answer, and I know you have a much better understanding of how we actually come to the number and how we answer that question of what's my case worth. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next video. Consider us your family lawyers for all your legal needs. If we can't help you, we'll find someone who can. We have a large network of lawyers who we know and trust. Don't just call anyone. Contact us at 800-675-8556 or visit our website at www.sskblaw.com.